Hello, Andrew from OQLIS, the data insights people, and welcome to the first episode of our podcast, Insights Overflow. In today's episode, we talk to our partner, Forte Supply Chain Solutions, where we get a sneak peek into the world and systems that drive supply chain. We'll also learn about why their customer-centric approach is a winning formula and how they use technology to empower their customers to improve. We hope to inspire and empower you with valuable insights to help you improve your business. Hello and welcome to the Insights Overflow podcast, the show where we talk to customers, industry leaders, and partners about their successes and the lessons that they've learned in order to make an impact. I'm joined now on episode 1 by Jean-Pierre Viljoen, commercial champion at Forte Supply Chain Solutions. Welcome, JP.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for being the first.
Yeah,
and
somebody's got to be the first.
Yeah, thanks to you and your team for the opportunity. We're grateful to be here.
No, thanks for joining. So there's a couple of things that I want to cover today. So I've got a couple of key points, and the interesting thing for me is, you guys are in the supply chain industry, right? So supply chain industry is made up of different sort of verticals inside of that. But, as a consumer, it's sort of, you don't have a window into that world.
Yeah.
So I think for me, what I want to get out of today is sort of understand a little bit what's behind the curtain, sort of unpack what it means from a consumer point of view, and sort of just speak about the industry trends and in particular, what the future looks like within the supply chain industry. So part of what I want to really uncover today is the curiosity around, say, for instance, everything we see in a shop or what we order on Take-A-Lot. Yeah. We almost take for granted that when we click and we add to cart that it even arrives at our doorstep.
Yeah.
And as a normal consumer, you don't necessarily really understand that thing's been picked, it's been packed, it's been loaded into a vehicle, it's been scanned, like there's all these steps that happen. And as a consumer, we don't really even know that happens, So I think what I want to sort of unpack with you is, the typical process to even getting like goods on a shelf, at a retailer.
Yeah.
Maybe you could describe, say, in the eyes of, say, being a manufacturer, all the steps it takes to actually land up on that shelf at the retailer or on your door at Take-A-Lot.
Yeah.
I think it'd be cool to sort of unpack that a little bit.
So I think we alluded to this in the lead up to this conversation, in that a lot of people just accept the comfort and things that is provided through them through things like technology and service providers and stuff like that, without actually questioning it or asking why. And I think that curiosity is sometimes dismissed because it's just like, why question it if it works? But it's only when there's like failures that people start asking questions and like hard questions.
And we've seen that in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
So I think for me, what I liked about, say, ordering from Take-A-Lot, right, is the ultra transparency.
Oh, right.
And, and I like that communication, that like real-time communication, like your order has been shipped, it has been loaded in the courier. It will arrive at a certain time, so that transparency wasn't always there. It was always like a bit of cloak and dagger. Okay, it's on this truck, and when's it going to arrive? So I think for me, what's interesting, especially from like a systems point of view, if you had to, say, be a fly on the wall at like the Take-A-Lot warehouse, what sort of systems do they actually have in place that allow that transparency and that efficiency that they're getting so right? Like in your experience and what you've seen, like, what are they doing?
So if you look at the best examples within like system providers and stuff like that, when it comes to like services or goods, it always starts with the the interaction between that system and the customer, the end user, right?
Okay.
And that, like, I can bring up the case for Uber that identified the key insight in that people, like, ambiguity is very, like, big source of frustration and uncomfortableness for human beings.
Yeah.
And we like to know that what's coming,
Yes.
like, have it a little bit more
Yes.
predictable. Like, as much as there are people that thrive on a little bit of randomness, most people like certainty and knowing when things are going to arrive. So any interaction or means of removing that ambiguity and that uncomfortableness for people, it goes a long way in the success of a system and the adoption of a system and the ease of use and all those things. So I think, any system needs to start there and actually sit and think about what is it we are trying to make easier for people to do. Like, definitely feeding into that people are of the comfort, not for, like, couch potato comfort, but like, just like ease of use, let's call it that. So if you look at your Takealot, your Ubers, they're very much set on first solving for that. Like, how do you make it as easy? Like, how do you refine this idea that we're trying to like sell, or the service that we're trying to provide? How do you refine that into its simplest form and make the UI as easy as possible to use, so that all these other things that traditionally take up a lot of human capital in resolving and stuff like that is far less, right? So frequently asked question sections on apps and stuff like that. Easy to understand interface. Like a 3-year-old should be able to order an Uber. That's how easy it should actually be.
Yeah, and I think also what people don't realize is, say you take this microphone as an example, right? This had to be sold, so it had to be in a warehouse.
Yeah.
But half of the effort is just trying to find where you put it.
Yes.
So every aspect about that particular product has to be located in some space and systemized and essentially sort of mechanized.
Yeah, and inventoried.
Exactly.
And managed.
So like, I mean, so how do people actually make sure that when they put this box down, they know where to go look for us? So, I mean, how do people typically do that?
To stand in that gap, you definitely need something like a WMS. And
so
WMS is...
what does that stand for?
So WMS is a warehouse management system. So, but that's not... like I said, that's not the first call, because the first system that you need is like some sort of ERP that would be your sales system, your enterprise resource and planning system that would deal with that that first step of
deal
the
with
customer,
the sale.
with the actual sale. Because like, what are you going to ship? Where are you going to ship it if you don't have the
to
sale
whom?
first? To whom?
Exactly.
So that would be the first system that you kind of need in place.
Why wouldn't they do that in the ERP? So I think I've seen this question a lot as well. You get, say, guys, even in retail, they think point of sale is their ERP. Like there's this misconception that there's one system to rule them all. So why do people need a WMS if they've got ERP?
Okay, so a WMS is going to be a very specialized system that does a very few things very well.
Yeah.
And that's where the concept of best in breed comes up, and that's where we at Forte try and partner with best in breed solutions for very specific use cases.
Yes.
Not that those use cases can't vary, but we have found that if you are focused on best in breed, you are able to offer a more concrete solution to the client's need. And then there's also things to make those best in breed systems talk to each other, and that's where myself on the data management team definitely stands in the gap to make those best in breed systems start talking to each other and doing cool stuff between the systems, so that you get to that point of having an ERP So all-encompassing enterprise resource and planning system.
So does the customer actually know that they need a WMS? So like is the market generally educated in terms of systems out there that they're like, oh, I need to go to the market for a WMS, or they fiddle around with Excel until that gets overbearing and somebody sells them a WMS? Like, how does that process typically work? Are they going outbound looking, or are they just sort of looking incoming for somebody just to solve the headaches that they have now? Like,
no, so I think it's a combination of both. There are definitely clients that like the risk for adopting a system and it not working out is quite high when it comes to like a WMS system, because if you can think, to use the case of Takealot, I mean, their warehouses are ginormous.
Yeah.
And like you say, you've ordered 5 copies of, I don't know, David Bowie's latest CD.
Yes.
And like, where exactly are those 5 CDs located? Now, first you need to go and look at like, okay, so how do you classify this item? So you could have sections that are classified differently. There's stuff to take into consideration, like special storage for different types of commodities and products.
You can't mix certain things.
I mean,
also how it gets delivered is different pack sizes, that how it's retailed.
So stuff like cold chain, it's very important there that the cold chain doesn't get broken, and like if the guys have a method that's been working reliably, now reliably is relative, because I mean, you could be carrying or like getting to a 80% completion rate or whatever, but that means nothing if it's not measured against something. And like saying that you fairly confident that it's 80% or working 80% of the time based on Excel numbers is not always so reliable. So, but at the same token, it's also a risk, because it could go lower than 80% if you put a system in place and it's not functioning properly, and you haven't taken the necessary steps to ensure that the necessary change management takes place that needs to. A lot of guys are very set on putting a system in place and then stepping back, where they forget that there's going to be resistance from the guys on the floor that have to use the system, because why are the robots here to take my job? Like, so there's that human reluctance to accept the new system, and change management is a big thing in this game.
Yeah, I think that's why it gets so important to have the right consultants in there, because, if the customer could really solve the problem, they would try in-house, but actually what they need is that outside expertise that really takes them through and handholds them through the process, because they're in the business of their business, not systems.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, that gave rise to the need for specialization and guys to actually focus on the implementing of these systems and putting together the solutions that you can then roll out. And I mean, each client's business processes are so unique that there is no off-the-shelf when it comes to supply chain solutions.
Okay. And they understand that, or they think that it's off the shelf, or a bit of both?
I think everyone that proclaims to have like an off-the-shelf that will work for every scenario. There's so much nuance in how people approach business. I mean, like, one guy calls it a load con, another guy calls it a dispatch note. Like, just that subtleties in variation can, and the way that those variances get communicated between the solution provider and the actual people that need to use the systems and stuff. A lot of projects fall flat there, and I've personal experience in that. Like, you hit like a brick wall where you just can't make progress on a project because there's miscommunication and misunderstanding. So I think, even in that, in managing a system rollout and stuff like that, there's always this need for the human factor to be taken seriously.
Yeah, and I think the people view systems also in a very silver bullet type fashion.
Oh, yes.
So you can imagine within the supply chain, you say you're a manufacturer, right? And you say, okay, cool, I'm going to implement the system. Your expectations are high that it's going to improve your life, right?
Yeah.
So from a management point of view, And then you might implement the system and might not see a change.
Yeah.
And you might realize maybe I got the wrong people, maybe I've got the wrong system, so always there's a high expectations from a system point of view that it will improve. And if everybody's not aligned across sort of the management levels and the expectations are set, it could be a recipe for quite a lot of internal conflict.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of my work as a commercial champion at Forte comes in that I am the first filter for the team. So I work with a fantastic team, but their solution offerings can only be as good as the information that I pass to them. So spending time at clients, really understanding their world, really understanding their need and why they might think they have this need, and is the questions they're asking of their data and stuff like that correct? Are their assumptions correct? Because they might be seeking something that doesn't exist yet. And that's where the maturity in communicating capabilities as well as like what you're going to offer comes into play, and setting that expectations and managing that expectations. But like, I approach it from like I paint the end picture and then we work down to the details.
Yeah.
So if you can create that simplistic understanding in the client's mind of like what it is the end state's going to look like and keep them focused on that, like the noise and the detail will sort itself out.
Because that's what they care about, the end state.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it comes back to that thing that I said earlier about people don't care about the system or how or when or whom unless things go wrong. Then they want to know who they can speak to. Where's the manager? Like, So
and what's interesting is that, say, being in the system space, and particularly with us in the data space, like to us, everything is data.
Yes.
And like data underpins all these systems. But what we've seen as well is that when it comes down to viewing a dashboard, getting an insight, getting a report, the customer's interested in the end result, not necessarily how you got there.
Yes.
You always got to keep focus, as we say in the office, keep the main thing the main thing.
No, so like I say, like when approaching like a problem that a client has, that first initial meeting, setting the tone, the expectation, and then staying committed to the course. I think, that benefits the client a lot and us as Forte, because obviously we're in the business to expand the type of work we do and the clients that we bring in and stuff like that has to be a good fit for us as well. So we constantly like refining the filters of like how do we get and how do we get to the point where we know what kind of things we do well and how to kind of like document those things and start building up that IP so that when we encounter similar problems that
you got the blueprint.
We got the blueprint. And that only comes with experience as well. So we've been in supply chain and providing systems for the past 10 years. And then more specifically data solutions, the division that I'm a part of, has been walking a journey for about 3 years where we've now refined exactly how we want to do what we want to do when it comes to things like integration and looking at business data as a whole for our customers.
I think that's what I've found quite interesting about sort of the Forte business, is that it's actually made of basically 3 entities, right?
Yeah. So we have 3 divisions currently, looking to expand as well into other sectors of the supply chain. But we have a division specifically looking after clients with warehousing needs. So that would be where you would find your WMS, your warehouse management systems, and then they have various solutions that they offer. But again, it's not off-the-shelf stuff. It's like very much in the customer's world, getting to know the ins and outs of their systems or their business practices, and then looking at how that system will benefit or move them to the next level. And then we have the sister to warehouse management. We have Forte Transport Management. Solutions, and they very much focused on operational tools that guys in the transport industry can use to improve their efficiency and like I'm out of my depth here when I speak about it, but like managing like cost per kilometer, lane rates, like invoicing, subcontractor management, all those kind of like transport operations oriented solutions they focus at rolling out. And then obviously we have Forte Data Solutions, which is my division. Well, the division that I fall under, and we specifically look at the holistic data story that your business has, and we kind of break it down into various chapters for you in telling your data story, so that you can infer better business decisions around where your data is, how your data is flowing within your business, and how different systems that don't necessarily talk to each other can talk to each other through means of integration. Yeah,
I think that's sort of one of the misunderstood things, is that data should tell a story.
Yeah,
and it should sort of drive a particular objective, and that's sort of where people get so hung up on where's this data coming from, what's the source, what does this integration look like, and they're not necessarily concerned with, well, who's going to consume this report? What insight are they looking to get? Is it operational data? Is it summary data? Is it high-level financial data, executive data? So having that sort of more holistic view and customer-centric view on what's happening is always good.
In that, I would say there's two tiers of like solve. So the first one would be like you need some sort of action out of like a report to be taken. So that would be like exception management, like guys that need to understand when something gets dispatched from a location and something happens to that inventory on the way to its destination, like how do you manage those exceptions? And that requires maybe a certain action, like a maintenance team needs to be sent out to the truck's location. So like how do you get that information together? Like how do you make it meaningful? And then sort of action. And that's more like the operational focused reports that you would build, that there's some sort of concrete action that needs to be taken and someone that needs to be notified of something that needs to happen next. And then you get more the reports and stuff that need to focus on some sort of decision needs to be taken based on like history or something that's going to influence the future long term. So then that's how I'd break it down into that. There's two tiers of like when it comes to reports and business intelligence reports and stuff like that.
I think for me, one of the coolest things that we did together as two businesses was the rail. It's basically called the rail report, but basically it's a GPS device that gets put on the rail track. And you ask yourself, okay, cool, well, how do I track the time it takes for this train to get from here to here? And usually you don't necessarily have interfaces into these other systems of the railways and all this thing, all those interesting things. So, so you think about it from a data perspective and you say, okay, well, I've got this GPS tracker. If I know where it is in space and I know where it was in space, I know, how long it's taking between two geo points. And, so just having an interesting view on quite simplistic data, which is just like geo points, allows you to glean a whole lot of information. Like, well, how long does a trip take? Is it above or below average? Is it trending one way or the other? That you can then use those insights to inform better decisions about, well, when should the goods arrive at the siding? And things like that. So that was a great example of, taking quite simplistic data and sort of deriving a great insight out of something. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where the world is, a person's oyster in that, like the need for investigating, like even those GPS devices, like what device you use, like that information. It's so overwhelming for the end consumer that needs to make use of these systems that like they need someone to stand in the gap to help them navigate the challenges. Through specialization.
Think about a transporter and the logistics industry in the world of ChatGPT.
Oh, right.
And, how do they sort of see that as either a tool that can help them and sort of not necessarily to be afraid of, So I think the rate at which technology is moving, it's so fast that it's very difficult to keep up with what's going on yourself, So you find you need to talk to industry experts or go to industry shows and see what the best are doing.
Yeah.
So like, how do you, in this world of like an AI hyped world, how do you see the potential within the supply chain industry for people to actually leverage this technology? Like in your mind, if you could wave a magic wand and sort of bring everybody on board on this sort of AI and sort of data journey in your mind, like what do you think that would look like? What types of problems do you think that could solve for people?
So a lot of the focus has been on optimization, like you say, but now it's I guess more important to start understanding like stuff like track and tracing and like understanding predictive like sort of like predicted outcomes, I would say, so that you can start honing down on the variances, because let's face it, majority of the noise originates, and this is like a natural law, Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule.
Where you see that everywhere.
Yeah, so it's literally from like stars in space and the galaxy, like the more they accumulate, or like 20% of the stars is responsible for like 80% of the mass of a galaxy. So it's a natural law, and like getting to those specific pain points, I'd call them, and ironing out those. I think if you look at ChatGPT's application with what's these guys called, GitHub.
Yeah.
And
with
I think they call it Copilot.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's something that came across my the stream of information that I consume, and it's something that now lives in my mind, as that there's literally a bot chat, or like having like a chat with you while you're busy coding, telling you in plain language what you're actually coding, and also fixing as you go along. So making things like I think the creativity element is still going to be very reliant on human, like humans actually asking the questions, and the chatbots and stuff like that being actually co-pilots in then compiling like concrete answers to some of those questions. But like the question will remain important.
Yeah. I think, the world of like AI, if you look at the world around you, it's actually made of a set of patterns.
Yeah.
And an AI is actually nothing more than like a super good pattern recognizer.
Yeah.
By looking at a lot of examples. That's inherently what it's doing. It's learning from what you give it. Say, here's an example of a great example. Here's an example of a bad example. Then it's like, oh, well, what are the characteristics that make a good example, and what are the characteristics that make a bad example? And are these the same? And do they share characteristics? And if this characteristic is dependent on that one and it changes X amount, it weights me more towards that, So the world of AI is essentially just one big probability calculator. But if you look at the world around you, that's essentially what our own neurons are doing. As we unpacking the world around us, unraveling the patterns. And every time we sort of look around, we say, oh, well, what can be next? What is that object? Have I seen that object before? What does it look like? So the cool thing is that a lot of how our own minds work is essentially sort of how AI sort of comes to particular decisions. So it's no surprise.
Experience.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that it's sort of entering the fray. And I think people, it's also been around for a long time. But where people have struggled is that, they maybe always didn't find the right use cases, or it was, say, too computationally intense to try get to a working model and an output, And I think since the advent of the hyperscalers like Microsoft, Google, Amazon Web Services, where compute has essentially become commoditized and at massive scale, so that the barriers to entry to train some of these models have become less and less. And then by having it available, we sort of get to test it on different use cases and maybe figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work. And one of the most interesting things to actually learn is when it doesn't work on a particular problem. And I think that's probably a lot where the whole supply chain space is probably going to go almost like through a renaissance, as people get more comfortable with AI and like the marketing around it gets strong. Everybody's going to say, oh, you got the supply chain problem? Slap some AI on it. Ask ChatGPT. But it's sometimes how you phrase the problem. It's sometimes how you put the data together. I know we were looking at a customer with a particular solution where they wanted to better manage how trucks get loaded into particular bays. And
that's a problem I've had personally as well. A client,
is it?
Where they wanted me to hard code it into the system.
Exactly.
And it just doesn't account for reality. And then you start like a chicken egg situation. Where you don't know if the hard code is the source of the problem. That's why the trucks aren't following the schedule that you've optimized, and then vice versa as well. Is it because they didn't follow the schedule that it's feeding?
Like it's just a feedback loop. And life is dynamic. And I mean, especially in the transportation industry, you've got delays, you've got different drivers, different characteristics. So what we put forward was
the labor law.
So basically, what we put forward was to say, well, okay, if we know what truck it is, right, and you've got a series of bays, given enough time and training data that you capture, you can essentially say, well, this truck with this number plate, with this driver transporting this particular good going to this bay on average takes X amount of time. And basically what you do is then your AI model becomes almost like a big simulation, if you will. And then in order to optimize, you might say, well, I want to reduce my total mean time to offload, or I want to lower my idle time of a bay. So in other words, a bay must never be open. So it's like, can I direct the truck at the exact moment that I know the truck is going to leave, and almost like have a countdown timer and based on an ML model. And you can't hard code that stuff. But I think even some of those ideas, it's difficult for people to wrap their heads around trying to put that type of solution together. They sort of want the outcome, but
and I guess it, like everyone wants like like you said earlier, silver bullet kind of solution, and the reality is that very often there isn't. Even though it might be sold to you as a silver bullet solution, the reality is that the majority of the times you're going to need best of breed, and then they're going to need some means of communicating, and you're going to start looking at doing stuff like building a central data lake and then modeling out of that. Because like you say, the more training data you can bring in, the better like predictions and stuff about the real world you can make in that simulated world. So brings up stuff like the Internet of Things. Like it's also a buzzword that everyone's hopped onto.
It is.
But I would say a big barrier very often comes down to the way of costing it, and like people see it as this massive like a line in the in the invoice book. This massive line item that they're going to carry. But if you just see it as part of your research and development and innovation budget, how can you put a cost on a solution that's going to 50x you?
So if you had to sort of distill Forte's like secret sauce into a couple of things, like how would you distill that? That sort of separates you.
Sauce, that reminds me of Max Gradwell's speech on tomato sauce, like what made this one entire, like it was also like in the line of economics and stuff. But I'd say our secret sauce is definitely our people and like just the camaraderie that exists, our esprit de corps, like just the commitment to each other and our clients, and actually adding value and standing in that gap, because we believe that in the supply chain there is the software gap that we seek to bridge, right? And like what it looks like exactly can vary, but like how it gets conveyed and how it gets communicated and all that, and like how we approach and tackle our clients' environments. That's why I said like it's very important for us to insert ourselves in our clients' business environments and really understand and get a lay of the land before we make any kind of recommendations or do any kind of selling. We want to make sure that when we partner, we're going to definitely partner for the benefit of both parties and not just have it be a one-way street where I drop a system and I leave. And that's why, we definitely also attach value to having first-line support as like a value add for our clients, and we take responsibility for that, where it's not like you don't know who to phone if you're having challenges with the system that we've rolled out. Like that's why we keep first line in-house, so that we take charge of that custom interactions.
Yeah, well, the phrase I recently coined was the acronym curtain.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, sort of in the world of technology, from a customer point of view, there's just so many acronyms and things to, like, so much information to take in. Yeah. You know, and you got to peek through the curtain and have somebody help you peek through the curtain.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so I'd definitely say more of a veil. And that's what I say to clients as well. Is like, if I was to summarize in like a quick snippet of like exactly what we do, is like, I want to take you on a date with your business's data, and she's the most beautiful girl in the room, but you've never seen her before because maybe you didn't have the right glasses, or your prescription on your glasses were wrong, or she was around the corner the whole time, or she was sitting in a different restaurant, or all these things. So like definitely take you on that journey of like actually introducing you to your data firstly, and then figuring out like how are you going to find your sweet spot and operate in that. So that's where I'd like to actually thank you guys as OQLIS for partnering with us to introduce our customers to that date with their data, in the fact that majority of noise in the supply chain comes through managing just these disparate sources of data, and like a lot of the time in the supply chain is spent in muddling and sorting out and refining what's relevant data, what's not. And we're definitely looking at getting to a space where we spend more time analyzing the data than actually sourcing the data, sorting, storing, and like manipulating data, other than just doing the analytics on that data.
Yeah, and I think it's to your point earlier, is that, the data should tell you the story.
Yeah.
And, maybe the best story is still to be written.
Yeah.
So I think the way that we definitely see it is that, data is a journey for people. And, just like going on that first date, it is a journey, but you got to have the end in mind, but also understand it's a process.
Yeah.
So I think for us as a company, it's important to have people that can walk that journey, and say take the customer through that process, and really have that end goal in mind. I think we're going to do some very, very cool things, which we've already done some cool things, but I think the best is yet to come.
Yeah, the best years are ahead of us. So.
Yeah. So JP, thank you very much for coming through today and being our first guest on the Insights Overflow podcast. And thank you very much for listening, and join us for episode 2, where we talk to more industry leaders, customers, and partners about their successes and their lessons learned in order to make an impact. Thank you very much.